right, which is this. But now instead of just adding a Postgres password, I think I'll have to do -e, and I don't want to run this in the background. So I do -e Postgres user equals, we'll just say Bob. Okay. Oh, it says didn't kill this container. So it says conflict, the container name Postgres, some Postgres already exists, it's in use. So let's just do Docker PS and let's stop this thing. Docker stop some Postgres. This returns this for me. It means it's probably working. We can do Docker PS again. And right, it's not, right, we successfully killed it. So then the next thing, let's boot this up again. We are specifying the name. We're specifying the password, the user, and then this is the name of the image, right, which will boot up this container. Ugh, I did kill it. It's all right. We'll just use a different name. We'll call this something Postgres. Okay, now it's booting up. This time I didn't do the -d, right? I didn't do the -d, so that's why it's not running in the background anymore. It's running directly here, and we can see all these beautiful logs stuff. Notice, here's that. Remember it said that it would, when it boots up, it will see if there's any files in here. Right now there aren't, but you can see it's starting to do that. You can also see it created the database, right? Anything else? Process complete. Listening. Okay. Let's go to a new tab. Type Docker PS. Here it is. Docker exec -it. This thing bash. There I am. We called this thing user is Bob. So if I do psql-u Bob, okay, there we are. Now we can, explore. Like, we didn't find any relations, etc. But you can imagine now if we want to, I'm gonna have to find my plug somehow. Create a table. Venues. Okay. Wait, why not? Create table. Syntax error. Isn't this a valid SQL statement? Oh, it's probably not. We probably need to specify let's say create database. Sorry. Foursquare. Okay. Right, because I'm going to need to put columns and things like that for creating a table. Okay, so now, here we are in Postgres. I guess it created this, I don't know why, for me. And then we have this database here. But if we delete this, right, if we close the container, remember, everything's copy on write. And then once we close a container, it gets removed. So what we probably have to do is use this, use that option that they told us, which is to, store the data. So there's two things here. One is this environmental variable is telling Postgres where to save the data. All right? And then two, this -v thing is saying, okay, I know you're going to write to here, but when you write to here, really write to my volume or to my bind mounted folder. That way when I reboot up my container, I can access the data. The data is not lost. Yeah? So you would just run this command, or some sort of equivalent to do that. One thing to note, by the way, of course, is right, this container is still running. When I bash into it and I do psql-u Bob, I think. No, let's get out of here. We can also dig around and explore, right? So let's see if there's this /var/lib. Does this folder even exist? cd/var/lib. Here's PostgreSQL. cd PostgreSQL. cd/date. So it does, right? So this is probably where, right, you can see that this is what actually holds my data in Postgres. So what we're going to need to do is have this, we would love for this to hold on to this. Because this way, if I just hold on to this, then any databases, any tables, any data I save will actually be saved in my volume the next time I boot up the container. So you can kind of imagine that like when you work with something like Postgres, there's all this machinery, right? We need like the server, like the Postgres server, to like listen for every time someone like makes a query, and writes like a select statement. I don't know. There's probably some sort of security things going on, but then there's like this one component that has the data, and basically we're okay with shutting down this container every time as long as we hold on to the data when we shut it down. So what we'll do is we'll just bind mount or store in a volume the data folder somewhere in Docker, if we're using a volume, or on our computer. Probably it's better to use a volume. And then the next time we boot up another version of Postgres, cool, that we'll be reading from this volume. And then we kill this guy. We boot up another version of Postgres, and then we're reading, we're still reading from this volume. Okay? So we're just holding on to the important part, and we're okay with booting up a new Postgres container each time. Does that make sense conceptually? Yeah? Beautiful. All right, then I'm done. I think it's doing better. All right, so here's different things I've seen. Ugh, what is this? My apologies. Okay, so we know that, like, if I do docker image ls, right, this will list all my images, meaning basically all like the downloaded software. And then docker run will boot up a new container. Will boot up like an instance of the image essentially into a container. So do docker run Postgres. Now, what some people did was docker run. Yeah, let's do this. What was docker run -d Postgres? I don't actually recommend this too much. So the -d, as we know, that runs this in the background theoretically. But the issue I have with this is, like, let's say we just do this. It looks like it worked, but then if I do docker ps, these things, and this is what can be confusing, is that here I have this other background image running. So it's like, oh, cool, like, why don't I just connect to the image I just created? But notice this was 2 hours ago, okay? So and then it's like, well, where's this guy? It doesn't look like it's anywhere. So if we take away the -d, right, we can actually read some errors here, so it's actually never successfully really booting up, or it's getting close and then it's running into an error and shutting down immediately. So what it is saying is, we need to basically provide a password. So let's do that. So do docker run -e to set the environmental variable of a password. And now I think this is starting to boot up. Okay, so some people were having the issue of like, well, now how do I actually write these commands here? But just go to a new tab. You can interact with Docker from anywhere. You don't have to be in the right directory or anything. I can just do docker ps, and now you can see this is my guy, right? If you want to confirm it, I guess there is no way. I thought that maybe I can get it would spit out for me the ID number, but I don't see that anywhere. But anyway, this is my guy. Probably the best thing for me to do is shut down this other one, so I can do docker stop, just so I don't get confused. So now if I do docker ps, I'm only looking at the container that was started a few seconds ago. Okay, so the next thing is, right, this component, I guess, which is, I set a password, we make sure we save the data, right, save the volume. We can get to that in a second. What we build up to, though, is like starting issuing commands, right? So we have this running container that has Postgres running in it, and just like on your, we're running bash in here. Just like if I wanted to, like, say PSQL connect to my database, like my Foursquare database, right, I would do like -d. It's the same thing with Docker, right, that I would do docker exec -it the name of this guy, and now I could do bash, to connect to bash, and here I am like in Docker's bash environment. All this thing is, if you think about this container, it is a bash environment that has Postgres running on it. So the same way that this is a bash environment, like my desktop is a bash environment that also has Postgres running on it. So I can do docker exec-it, run the psql command. All right, so let's try to do this. Okay, so this is interesting, right? It says connection to this server is failed, which makes me feel like, all right, maybe Postgres isn't working, but that's wrong. We'll figure that out in a second. I just want to check this question. Okay, thank you, Miles.
Not a question.
Not a question. Okay, so if I do, so we have docker exec-it, psql, right, this broke, and then we have role root does not exist. So the issue actually is that this is the same type of error we'd get if we're just running psql on our desktop. Like, the problem is we're trying to connect with a user root that does not exist for Postgres, right? Like, we'd never created a user called root. So what we could do is, to make sure we're logging in with the right user, is one, set another environmental variable called Postgres user equals, whatever you want. How do I know this? It's in the documentation. And now we are creating a user. This environmental variable will create a user called Bob inside of Postgres. You probably can even see it here somewhere. I don't know where. But like where, it creates the database, somewhere around here, it probably also creates that user Bob. So now if I do docker exec, I'm doing the wrong name. So docker ps is confident Morse this time. Docker exec this. Now I do psql -u, right? We'll specify the user that I'm logging in with, Bob. Right? And now we're connected. Notice the database is off, right? Because by default it's using the same database name. So let's go a little bit further. Let's do -d, and then I'm not sure, Postgres or whatever it is. So now this is as the user Bob connecting with Postgres, right? And you can probably see that if you do the coninfo, right? Connected to database Postgres as user Bob on port 5432. So that's pretty good. Next thing is now we want to run a file, right? So basically we want to do like the -f flag. So the point I'm like getting at is like, yeah, we want to do all this stuff, but like just do one at a time. Like our whole programming technique is that we're always going to make mistakes, so just take it one step at a time so we can figure out where it's breaking. Okay, so what do we want to do next? What we can do is, so I have this folder, migrations, and if we boot this up, let's boot up a new container, and then I like try to run that command. I'll just cd into curriculum, document, curriculum. Do I not have curriculum? Oh, it's Jigsaw curriculum. Then I think it's my Docker curriculum. Yeah. Okay. So here I have this migrations folder. Now, if I just try to, run psql docker exec into, we'll have to get the right container name, then run psql -u bob against the database, right? So let's just take a look at this new container name, Brave whatever. Then docker exec against Brave Archimedes, run this command against this guy. Let's just make sure that works. Okay, that works fine. Now let's build up to it, -f. If we run the create tables.sql, right? This file, we want to run this file against the Postgres database that exists inside of the Docker container, but this file doesn't exist inside of that Docker container. So we're like running into this brick wall. Okay? So it says no such file directory. So instead what we need to do is, when we boot up the container, we need to do the bind mounting thing. So now just add on to this -v, and it will be /migrations, into, and then I think I could move it into the home directory. So there's a root home directory. I'll show you this in a second inside our Docker container. And let's see if that works. And it's the right. This is a good sign. So now let's go over here. We'll do. Let's take a look. So do Docker PS. We just created this guy. Docker exec -it bash. All right. So we dig around. We type ls. Right. We're in bash. We see this home directory. Let's cd into that. And there's a file. Okay. Create tables.sql. So we successfully bind mounted, right? This is what we did. Docker run, set the environmental variables. Then we did -v, set my desktop, my laptop's migrations folder, the contents of this, into the home directory in my Docker container. And because of that, when I go to home, there it is. So now what I can do, this is my container still running, is basically now I can run the -f, but where, run that file. But where's that file located? It's located in /home/create-tables.sql. All right. So remember, exec is to run a command against a container. So I have a container this is the container. This is, the specifications, and this is the file in the container that I'm going to run against Postgres, on this database. So I do that. That's not fun for me. Let's do Docker PS. Maybe some new hardcore. Oh, I'm using the wrong one. Okay, and now this is working. It feels like, right? It looks like this is running. So we can confirm this by now just logging in to my Postgres database. We do /dt, and there they are, right? So then, before I move on, questions about this? Right? Set the environmental variables. This is like particular to this image. So in this image, right, requires this environmental variable, or this, I think this one, to get going, and then this one is optional. And then I'm mounting the contents of my laptop's migrations folder into the home directory in the container. And then finally, we always end with, the image that you're booting up. When you do Docker run, the last argument's always the image you're booting up. So the next issue is just the fact that, if you shut this down, if I shut down the container, all those changes are lost, right? And we know that because everything's copy on write. It does, it's designed that way. So what do we need to do next? We need to bind mount, or not bind mount. We need to basically save my databases, all the data in Postgres, into a black box, into that volume, which will live on my desktop. So if you look at the documentation, it says, this is, I think, how it works, where anything Postgres is going to save all of its changes in the database in this folder, and we're going to want to store it in some sort of volume, So we can add another -v flag. Sorry. So what we'll do is, here's another -v, and then we'll say my data or whatever for a volume name, and then this is the colon. Now this is the folder. Anything that normally is written here, we're going to write to my box, my volume here. Press return. This seems like it's working. And now if I go over here, now I'll do Docker PS, and we got this guy, and I'm going to run the migrations against, and just to show you, I did both in this case. So if you just look at this, I set an environmental variable, two of them, -e, and I set two kind of -v flags. One to move the contents of the migrations folder into the home directory in the container, and another one to take the data that's stored here and store it in this volume. All right, so if I go here, if I do docker exec and then run bash and type ls and cd into home, right, it's still here. All right, so then I'll get out of here. And then I'll do this. Is this the right name? No, Wonderful Franklin. Wonderful Franklin. And then -u -d -f /home create tables. Nope, that's all right. I'll just type it out. Create tables .sql. So now this will run against, right? This successfully ran the file in my container against the Postgres database. And now if I shut this down again, as long as I boot it up with this volume, this guy, I think it will work. Because anything, I don't even need the -v for the, right? I've already run the migration, so I don't need to like move that file in there again. Let's take a look. Docker. Let's see the new recently created guy, and and this guy has the same data. It should at least as the last one. So docker exec -it, this thing, and I could do PSQL to directly go into it. Oh, damn it. -u Bob. Okay, and now here let's connect to the Postgres database, and now let's do -dt, right? And these are my same migrations from the last time. Okay, so the reason why so I successfully persisted my data, right? This is a new container, but I held on to the changes I made in the previous one by doing this line here, right? By mounting to this. Yeah, Kyle?
Yeah, I was starting to write something. I'll just send it. So I'm wondering what the most used flags are. It seems like the name, the environment variables, so like user, password. V is volume, so that's how we map something from local to the container, the remote.
That's the data.
Right?
Yeah, any data, like any files, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's bind mounting with the V.
It's both.
And
it's both. So -v is both for bind mounting and for volumes. Same flag for both of them.
Okay, got it. And so after you do that, it will persist in the container.
Well, in the volume.
And
yeah.
In the volume.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the F is a file. Does that execute something?
The F
from
is not.
local, or?
Yeah. So this is not a. The stuff I'm doing here, like PSQL, right? This is all of a sudden now I'm issuing Postgres commands. The same way you can issue these Postgres commands, like this whole thing is issued against this container, if that makes sense. So this is to issue this is a Postgres command or PSQL command that allows you to run a file against a database. So that's what I'm doing here.
A local file or a file in the container?
A file in the container. So that's why what I first had to do was mount that file in that container here, so it lives in home. And then in the next tab, I then run the file that's in the container, right? That's in home. I run that against the Postgres database.
Got it. That's okay. Instead of logging into the bash in the container and then running it from within, you're just doing it in one shot and then exiting.
Correct. Right. That's a great point. So I could have, if I had bind mounted, I stopped bind mounting that file. But if I wanted to, I could have, gone into with bash, found that file in home. It's not there right now and then run PSQL from here, from inside the container. But instead what I did was, say like, oh, I can do this in one just for fun. Exec IT, so run a command and run this whole command against this container. Okay, let me see.
Cool, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chris?
Yes, I think I'm still a little bit confused. So you bind mounted the SQL file into the container, and then how are you able to get it into the volume after that?
Well, the SQL file, this create tables file, isn't in the volume. What I'm doing is, when Postgres saves data, like when you insert any data in the database or like create any tables or anything like that, where is it storing that on disk? Normally it's storing that here in this folder. So instead what I'm saying is, instead of storing that in this folder, store that in my volume. So the next time I boot up a container, it's going to be, Postgres looks for that data, looks for any changes I made to the database by reading from this folder, but instead of reading from this folder, it's going to be reading from my volume. Right? So as long as I do this, as long as I basically create this portal that says anything written to here actually goes here, anything read from here actually goes here, then I'm holding on to the good stuff. Like I'm reading and writing to this this volume, right? And the next time I boot up a container, I can, I'm reading any of the changes I made to that previous containers database are being read actually from my volume.
Okay, so you copied that file into the container that you just created, and then later you ran that file to create all the tables in Postgres. Mm-hmm. And because of that second -v, where you connected the volume to that Postgres folder, mm-hmm. Then you're able to see all the tables in a new container because you put it in that volume. You
exactly.
Put those folders in your volume.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's what's going on. All right. I'll send you at least these 2 lines, with 15 minutes. So I'll let you play around and send you these 2 lines so that you can